Hello, I'm Kristy Wallace, and this is Suddenly I See, a podcast which explores the power of a positive mindset, gratitude, and love in changing your life for the better. Join me as I share the mind hacks, rituals, and choices that have helped me survive and thrive in the face of adversity to arrive at a point where suddenly I see what truly matters in this life. Let's get started. Hello and welcome to episode 7, Work. I hesitated again, should I do this one or not, but I just learned so many things from this little scenario that I was like, no, I have to share because I'm all about the wisdom and that's what I'm here for. So prior to having Patty, I was a teacher at our local high school in town, and I absolutely loved my job there. I had this incredible staff room full of women who had similar interests. They were creative, they were passionate, they loved teaching. And so to be around them constantly just lit me up in such an amazing way. I was also a year advisor at the school, so I'd gotten to know this group of kids now for a few years, and I really love working with kids. I like the opportunity to help shape their minds, help guide them. Content's there and we have to teach it. And, obviously I'm interested in that as well. But the real passion, I think, for educators and teachers is making connections with kids and helping them to discover themselves and learn and grow. And so for me, teaching was everything. And I always really struggled when I was on maternity leave because I had to stop teaching. And really, for a long time, I struggled with adapting to the role of being a mother because I was so driven and felt so fulfilled by my career that was always, an itch I wanted to get back to as quickly as I could and scratch. And so when Patty was diagnosed, it was around the time I was getting ready to head back to school and return from maternity leave. And obviously when he was diagnosed, it meant that I was no longer able to go back. And my principal at the time was keeping in touch, and we kind of took it term by term. But after that first term and being on treatment with Patty and seeing how much it really just took control of our lives, I said, look, I think you're better to write me off for the rest of the year if that's okay. And because it's just too much pressure and this is just where I need to be for this year. And he was okay with that. And up until that point, I'd actually just been on temporary contracts. So I'd been working at the school for nearly 5 years and just on temporary contracts that got renewed each year, really without too much question or hesitation. And so one of the things I was really looking forward to was the opportunity to get back to school. And it got to term 3 or 4, and there was a little block for a couple of weeks where they needed a teacher in our staff room to be covered. And so they called and said, any chance you're interested in doing it? And I thought, yes, I would love to. For me, in a world of chaos, teaching was my constant, that I knew it, what had happened to Patty still hadn't affected my career. It hadn't affected my teaching. I could go back there. I could be successful. I could plan a lesson. I could nail it. And it gave me the feelings of success that I wasn't getting in the trenches at home. And so I was all for doing this block of teaching. And as the time rolled around closer and we got to the week that teaching started, of course, Patty became unwell. And so he ended up in hospital. But I was so determined that I was like, what's happened to Patty will not change me as a teacher and I will be there. And so I still completed the few weeks that I'd signed up for. Meanwhile, Patty was in hospital for a solid chunk of that time. And my husband, to his credit, took up the challenge of staying in hospital with Patty during that time so that I could go and be who I needed to be and teach and reconnect with my kids at school and my, friends and colleagues. And it was amazing. And then it got to the end of the year and discussions were starting to happen around, so what would next year look like? And I decided that I'd be fine to return because we'd now done, most of our time on chemo. We were just going to have a couple of months in February and March when school was back where he was finishing treatment. But really, we'd broken the back of this long slog and I was in a place where I knew I could commit to coming back 2 or 3 days a week. We had fabulous family support from both my mother and mother-in-law, so we knew that Patty would be cared for when I was at school. And I felt like this was, my chance to re-engage back in the real world. And I was really excited about that. And so I had a call from the principal when we were at Ronald McDonald House for one of our visits. And I remember seeing the phone and thinking, oh, yes, here we go. I'm going to find out about what's happening next year. Answered the call and he said, I've had a chat with the deputy and we've decided that we think what would be best for you given your current circumstances is if we gave you a more flexible working arrangement. And in my head, I instantly went, no, because I didn't need flexibility. I needed stability. That was my whole year was unstable. I needed something stable to lock down and work around in life. And so he said, we decided instead of putting you on a class, we'd like you to be the person who does the personalised plans or the individual education plans for students. And the students that normally require these plans are those that might have learning difficulties. They could have a disability of some kind or be of Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent. And so he's essentially said, I can't go on class, but instead I'll work with parents and get to hear all about their children and their disabilities and their challenges, which is not something I was really in a headspace at all to be dealing with because I was already going through my own fun challenges with NDIS and learning what it's like to have a child with disability and drowning in the admin that surrounds that as well. And here he is telling me I can't teach anymore and that now I've got to do more admin, which is what I absolutely hate the most about having a child with a disability. But I get to do that admin for other people and for the school. And I just felt my heart sink. And I was gutted because, as I said, teaching was my everything. And I was looking forward to getting back into that and having some normality around my life. As the weeks passed after that discussion, my kind of anger and frustration really built around that decision and the fact that he decided what was best for me in my circumstances when really he had no idea what my circumstances were like at all. And luckily I had, as I said, this beautiful staff room of strong women who were willing to go into bat for me and said, what are you doing? Why isn't Kristy coming back? We need her on staff. We've got the classes there. What's going on? And despite all of their efforts to advocate on my behalf internally as well, the principal had made his decision that I was not going back on class. And this shook me in so many ways because I needed my job back. I needed my normal back. I felt like this job was my purpose and now I was being told I couldn't do it. And it made me think, like in my mind, nothing had actually changed in my teaching ability. And I knew that I'd gone and taught while Paddy was in hospital and no one would have ever known that he was in hospital at the time. I prided myself on the ability to mask and be a professional. And so now someone was challenging that, which makes you challenge your own thinking and go, well, maybe something is wrong with me. Is there something wrong? Why can't I teach anymore? And I remember talking to a friend who's from a legal background and she's like, well, Kristy, it's not illegal what he's doing. If you're on a temporary contract, he can just choose not to renew it. And that really annoyed me because it was the truth. But in my head, it was so morally bankrupt of him to make that decision on my behalf. There wasn't consultation. The decision was made. We've decided you're not teaching anymore. And it was the final straw, in a world that had already crumbled around me. My teaching and my profession was the one thing that I knew I could still keep and do. And now that had been taken from me as well. So it set me back quite a lot to have to process that. The other challenge that came with that is trying to go into a workplace then, knowing what I know now, would I have taken that job and stayed? Hell no, I would have told him where he could stick it. But the current Kristy at that point was still working her way through a really tough situation. And I didn't see any other options because we only had one high school really that was a public high school in our town. And so it was take it or have nothing was my kind of understanding of that situation. And so in order to be able to walk into a place where you're going to see a principal and a deputy who no longer support and value or back you is really, really hard. And so the way I would mentally prepare for that was through walking like I'd always done, but through listening to certain songs that would pump me up and get me in the zone so that I could get in a state where I knew no matter what came at me, if I saw this principal or not, I could get through the day and I could do my job and I would be professional and I would talk to parents and hear about their children and their disabilities and what they needed. And, even though every part of me was challenged by doing that role, I was going to show up and I was going to get revenge by doing that job the best that I could because that's who I was. And there was one song in particular that came out at the time, The Greatest Showman, the movie came out. And there's this song called This Is Me. And so I would walk, do my 3K walk or whatever around the block with this song basically on repeat a lot, just like pumping myself up, psyching myself up to walk into that school. And I want to share with you some of the lines. Some of you may know it, but it's just such a powerful song. So it says, when the sharpest words want to cut me down, I'm going to send a flood, going to drown them out. I am brave. I am bruised. I am who I meant to be. This is me. Look out, 'cause here I come, and I'm marching on to the beat I drum. I'm not scared to be seen. I make no apologies. This is me. And as I'd walk, I'd actually like thump my chest on the "this is me" in the ultimate fuck you to the principal, basically, because my only option, I felt, like I said, was to show up and do that job the best I could. But obviously, in hindsight, if you need to get yourself in that state to walk through the door of your job, you're probably in the wrong job, right? But it was my survival tactic, and it helped shift my mood in a really big way so that I could get in and do what I needed to do. So I put up with this role basically for 6 months. Occasionally I'd get some casual days because, when it suited the school, I could be a teacher. But, for the most part, I needed to be their admin lady and do these plans. And then I happened to just be at Woolworths one day. Again, Woolies, hey, it's the place where everything happens in small towns. And this lady came up, and she was from the Catholic school in town. She said, "Oh, hey, you're not looking for work by any chance, are you? Because we've got this maternity role coming up in English and history, and we're looking for someone to take it on." And I thought, oh, yeah, I guess I am kind of open to that idea. Like, previously, I hadn't considered the Catholic school. I'm not someone who was raised with religion in their life. I went to the odd Sunday school. My parents forced me to do it through high school, but I actually spent a huge part of my life rebelling against religion whenever it appeared. So the thought of me teaching at a Catholic school made many of my friends and family just have a chuckle, actually. But I was at a point where I was so unhappy in the role that I had that I was actually willing to think outside the box and consider other things. And so I went into the school and had an interview with the principal. And it was one of the best interviews I've ever had because I walked in there knowing that I had nothing to lose and deciding to just be completely upfront and honest with what had gone down. And so I shared the fact that, nothing had changed in my professionalism and my teaching capabilities. But for whatever reason, the principal had decided not to put me on class this year, and instead that I'd be doing these plans. And so, yes, I've learned a lot about, how to make adjustments for students and the importance of these plans. But my real passion is being in the classroom and teaching and being with students. And I wear this necklace, which I'll talk about. I'll do an episode on anchors and things, but I have this necklace I got that was my Oprah necklace from when she came to Australia. And it's got a beautiful pearl, but that's got the O in the center, this big open O. And for me, every time I put that on, I tell myself I'm going to speak openly and honestly from the heart, and it sits over my heart as well. And so I made sure I had this necklace on, and I went in and I, just laid it all out on the line for this principal. And she was so understanding, and she said, "That's fine. Thank you for sharing, what you've been through and where you're at. We respect that. We'd love to give you a trial and see how you go. We'll get some casual days happening. And then if you want to apply for the position, feel free to apply for it." And so I remember doing my first casual day at this school. And at the end of the first lesson, when the students left, they all stood and said, "Thanks," like individually thanked you as they walked out the classroom door. And at first I thought, are they taking the piss out of me? Like, why are they saying thank you? That's a bit weird. And it turns out that this school is just the most incredible and amazing place where the children and the parents value the education that they're given at that school, and the students appreciate the time that you put in to prepare the lesson and what you've taught them. And so they thanked you on the way out. And it was like I'd found this, secret, amazing, hidden gem of a school that every school really could learn from modeling. And so I applied for the job and got the job, which was amazing. And to this day, I'm still at that school. And I actually found the most incredible safe space for my own children to go to school as well. And so now in hindsight, actually, when I look back at the principal's decision to take me off class and shift me onto plans, it's actually one of like, thanks, mate. You did me a solid favor because I found a job where I feel so valued. I feel I can make an impact. I feel like my children are safe and happy there. And what turned, as always, the silver lining, what was a really horrible and traumatic experience turned out to be the ultimate redirection and a total gift as well. One little kind of side note story that I thought I'd share with you. It's probably gives an insight into the not great qualities of my character, but I had to go there. So at my previous high school where I was teaching, where the deputy and the principal had decided I shouldn't be on class and, completely written me off with my teaching abilities because, suddenly she's got a kid with a disability, so therefore she can't be competent. Anyway, the deputy and her husband, who worked at the school as well, had decided it was time to move to another one. And it just so happened that I'd been asked to do a casual day at this school, and it was going to be my last day at the school because I knew I was heading already to the Catholic school. And so I decided, I'll do this casual day. And it was going to obviously coincide with this deputy and her husband's last day as well. And so what we would do on Fridays, we'd have staff morning tea. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to bake these bastards a farewell cake. And so if you ever want to chuckle, like if you have a staff member you don't enjoy, if you Google it, like passive-aggressive farewell cakes or something, I think I typed in because that's where I was at. And you'll find some crackers, and I was not bold enough to go that far. But I did bake a beautiful cake, and I got Smarties, and I just wrote, "See ya," CYA, on this cake. And I thought, am I going to do this? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And so I brought it in to staff morning tea, and I just put it on the table that morning. And as it always is when you're a casual, like you're on duty at lunchtime anyway, so you don't get to actually have the morning tea. And this deputy and her husband were there and sat down, and the husband was like, "Oh, someone's baked us a cake. Oh, wow." Like he was so chuffed about this cake. And then, halfway through eating it, he's, who made this cake? Does anyone know who's made this cake? And someone said, "Oh, I think Kristy Wallace made that cake." To which the PE teacher at the time, who I love, she's a dry sense of humour, allegedly nearly spat her cup of tea across the table. And then everyone's like, "God, do we eat the cake? What's she done to the cake?" And, I'm better than that. I hadn't tampered with the cake. But for me, it was just the ultimate, farewell gesture, the flicking of the bird through cake, if you will. And I know it's petty, and I know it shows I'm passive aggressive, but you know what? That's sometimes when you feel like you're being picked on from those above, the only thing you can do to right that situation is, bake a cake. It's a friendly gesture. But for me, it was a gesture that meant everything. And it was a closing of the book and a farewell for everyone, because I knew I was out of the school. As disappointed as I was that I was going to no longer be working with my colleagues in the department, I knew I had them as friends. And so I still walked out of there with everything I needed. And I left behind the disrespect and, the poor leadership that I didn't need in my life anymore. And I found somewhere totally beautiful to continue on my passion of teaching instead. So takeaways from this episode. First one, work is never more important than your family. This principle held up the most beautiful mirror for me to see that I'd turned myself inside out, going to school while my son was in hospital to prove to them that I was worthy of working and a great teacher. And in life, you know what? You don't need to do that. If you're good at what you do, you should be respected for that. And nothing is ever more important than your family. That's where you need to spend your time, and that needs to be your number one priority. The second takeaway is that if you have to constantly prove yourself and your skills and your talents, and you're not being valued and respected, then have the courage to know that you deserve better and walk away. Find something else. It's the one thing I look back and I regret that I hadn't worked out sooner, and that I had to kind of suffer through that 6 months and, feel all the feelings, pump myself up to be able to get into a workplace. In hindsight, no, I should have walked much earlier. And so that's one of the big takeaways that hopefully others can learn from sooner. The third takeaway is the power of music and movement to shift your state of mind. And so, whether it's a meditation music and some stretching to release a tough day, whether it's putting on your pump up tracks to do a workout or getting the right mindset because you've got to, smash a presentation at work or whatever it is. One of my greatest and most continued hacks through life is always music and movement. Fourth takeaway is that being honest will set you free. You can mask, and I've done that a lot of my life as women. I think we're raised to mask how we're feeling, what's really going on, keep, the personal separate from the professional. And And I still believe that to a degree. Like, you can't turn up and teach and just cry in the classroom because you're having a tough day. There's a level of professionalism that's required. But I think if you can be open and honest with your colleagues and your leadership about what's actually really going on in your life behind the scenes, but still bring professionalism to the workplace, then you'll be more respected for it. And again, it's about finding people that can see through that and still judge you on your abilities and skills and not on your circumstances. That's the key. The next takeaway is, don't let anyone tell you what you are not capable of, particularly if they're in a position where they actually have no understanding or attempt to understand what's happening in your life and what your goals are. So if someone dares to tell you you're not capable of that, or they don't believe in your ability, then my suggestion is that you use that to fuel your passion even more to go forward and achieve that goal. You're the only person that sets the limit on your life and your goal and what you will and you won't achieve in this world. And anyone else who wants to have an opinion can just shelve it, because it's not going to get in the way of what you need to do in this life. And the final takeaway is that sometimes you just have to bake that cake and be that person, because if that brings you joy and the closure and clarity you need, then you go and you bake that cake. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me for this kind of short, but really so many learnings from this little experience with work that I just had to share it. So I hope you've enjoyed it. See you next time. I hope this episode has given you something to reflect on, or some tools that you can implement in your own life. If you know someone who could benefit from this episode, please share it with your family or friends. It would mean so much to me. Remember to stay positive, be grateful, and take each step of the journey with kindness and love in your heart. Until next time, bye.